Welcome to the webinar. You have entered as an attendee in listen-only mode.
Will be available probably early next week on our website. We have a webinar page that lists all the webinars we've done, which we do one a month, and it's also on YouTube. And so when people signed up today for this webinar, you were able to ask questions. We are going to go through some of those. We had a lot of questions, and we'll also have a chance during the webinar today to ask questions. On your GoToWebinar block or bar, if you will, near the bottom is a questions tab, and you can ask questions there that Katie Hollenbeck will put together during the webinar and we'll go to at the end. So, yeah. I'm Steve Wilson. I'm a groundwater hydrologist at the Water Survey. We have Ron Helton, who is a licensed septic installer from D&D Sewer in Lincoln, Illinois, who is the expert. He's licensed installer and inspector, and I am not a septic expert, so we're grateful to have Ron on the line. And also Katie Hollenbeck, I mentioned, she works at the Water Resources Center as an outreach specialist, and she'll be fielding all the questions that you put into the GoToWebinar button today that we can deal with at the end. And we are going to go through, after my presentation, a number of questions that you've asked already that Ron will mostly be answering for you about a wide range of topics related to septic systems. So with that, the talk mostly is about conventional septic systems, where it's a wastewater treatment system. Like anything else, it needs to be maintained and managed. And so what it basically does is it relies on the natural degradation by bacteria of our waste to then break that down and allow it to go into the soil and into the natural system. It starts out with a septic tank and then goes to a septic field. The tank separates the solids, and it also gives the bacteria time to do their job, so to speak. And so there's really two parts to the system. I'll show you an example next. And then the liquids leave through a piping system that disperses through a drain field if it's set up properly. So here's I apologize for this being so blurry, but this is a typical two compartment septic tank coming from your house on the right, and all the ways from your shower and toilet and everywhere, and sink, everywhere else. The solids fall to the bottom. There's floaties, the scum layer on top, and then the water in the middle that the bacteria are working on all that stuff. It goes into the second compartment where more stuff can settle out. And then as more water enters the system, it's pushing water through and out through the outlet into the field perforated pipe. That's the drain field. And a better example of that shows here on the left is a typical tank. That's a one compartment tank. There's an inlet pipe and an outlet pipe. You have a riser and an inspection port on the top. Many times these get buried, which is a common issue. Hopefully you have a way to know where those are at. I know some people call us and don't even know where their septic system is, those sorts of things. So there's over 25 million homes that have septic systems or on-site wastewater systems in the U.S., which is, quite a number of people. And so the way it works, you can see on the diagram on the right, you have a septic tank. It goes into a distribution box. Someone asked a question about a D box. That's what this is. From there, it separates into your distribution field or your absorption field. A lot of times this is perforated pipe with, it's been dug out and filled with sand to give it more infiltration capacity. And then that slowly infiltrates further into the ground, and where more bacteria can work on it and break it down and make it harmless. And so this natural system works really well by itself, and they're almost every system prior to 10 or 15 years ago was set up this way, assuming they had the right ground for that and had a place to do that. So when they do fail, you'll know it. Either a number of things can happen. The area around your tank or drain field may turn thick green grass, and that's because it's not going down into the ground the way it's supposed to, but instead something's plugged up or clogged, and that water is staying near the surface and affecting the growth around at the surface. It may form a pool of water, which, depending on when it is and how hot it is in the middle of the summer, not only is the ground spongy, but you'll notice the smell. I mean, it is your septic system. And worst case, if it plugs up the entire tank, it could back up into your house. And it's estimated 10 to 20% of systems have had this happen. So knowing how to take care of your system and identify when there might be a cause or a problem are certainly critical to making sure that you don't have any of those issues. As far as issues are, it's proper sizing and design. So many times it's either undersized or it's not designed properly for the area you're in. You see cases where someone has bought an old home that maybe had 3 people living in it when it was built. They've either tore that down or they've now got 5 or 6 people living there. So the capacity of that system isn't right for the amount of flow that's going through it. And that can certainly cause more solids to build up and eventually clog your system. Where is the system at as far as the regulations in your state? It needs to be away from your well. It should be not impacting the environment. We find old systems where it goes straight to a field tile or discharges into a stream. Those are illegal, and they're not protective of the environment or any surrounding shallow wells and things like that. So many people don't maintain their wells or their septic systems the way they're supposed to. They believe that they don't need to be pumped, or they've been told that if they add additives, it'll take care of it. And I've had people email me and say, I use Ridex or some other additive, and I haven't had to pump my tank for 20 years. Well, it's not because of the Ridex, and you're waiting for your system to fail is basically all you're doing, because you've been very lucky if in 20 years and you've never pumped it, you haven't had a problem. So things to deal with or to understand related to sizing and design, really it's about when to pump your solids. Your tank's going to fill up with solids, that's just a fact. And so understanding how much water is running through your system and how much the system's being used and the size of your tank together kind of dictate how often it needs to be pumped. In the same way with your drain field, it matters. You need to have enough drain field for the flow and the amount of water and materials you're pushing through. So once you know that, your drain field, it's really important to make sure it's designed properly from the get-go. As far as public health goes, if you have things like a straight pipe to the surface or to a tile or to a small stream or a ditch, it is illegal in most areas. There are a lot of new regulations, which I know Ron will get into when we start talking through some of the questions. And you need to consider the impact that might have on the environment or your neighbors. I know one of the questions we had today from someone who signed up for the webinar was about what to do when their neighbor's discharging directly to a stream behind their house or on their property. It's illegal, and it needs to be dealt with. So where is your drain field? Do you understand even where that's at and the groundwater flow direction? It should be far away from your well. It's better if they're on opposite sides of the house. Every state has its own regulations on how far those must be. And also understanding groundwater flow. If you're on ground that's sloping, the water table typically follows the land surface slope. So because the septic system is a shallow drainage system, typically that water is going to also follow the water table, which you may have a very deep well and you're using an aquifer that's buried several hundred feet below land surface, and the flow direction could be much different for your well. But understanding where your septic is going and what direction it might flow, especially after a big rainstorm where there's a lot of infiltration and water is being pushed towards all the streams in the area, it's just good to know where your well sits. The other example of that is if you're in a subdivision, where there are multiple homes with multiple wells and multiple septic systems. If, for instance, you're the last house on the east end and water flows from east to west, you're great. But if you're the fifth house in, that means there's 4 other septic systems that water is moving towards the west, toward you, the shallow groundwater table. So, if you happen to be in an area where it's all shallow dug and bored wells, then that's a concern for your water quality. So as far as maintenance goes, as I mentioned, they need to be managed just like your water system is managed. They will eventually fail, it's just a fact, but they can last a long time. Just like your well, some people have wells that are nearly 100 years old. They're very lucky in those cases that their well still works properly. They haven't had any other issues, but it does happen. The same with your septic system. You manage it properly, you're careful about what you put in it, you pump it like it's supposed to be pumped, then you're more likely to have your system last a long time. It's a natural system and it works great, so it doesn't need a lot of other things done to it as long as you're doing the proper maintenance. And here are some things not to do. Putting toxics, people pour paint or clean out their paintbrushes, those sorts of things. Your septic tank is full of bacteria. So, for instance, someone says you should pour Clorox down your toilet. Well, what's chlorine do? Chlorine kills bacteria. And so if you're adding too much, the system can handle some amount of chlorine and soap and those things, but if you're using too much of those things, it'll disrupt the biological treatment. Here's some other things: grease, coffee grounds, cat litter. All those things don't belong down your sink or your toilet. They'll eventually clog things up and make your system less effective. Here's an example from the National Environmental Services Center, which is NESE, which is at the University of West Virginia. From their pipeline is a magazine they used to put out on wastewater issues. And so here's an example of what they put out as far as the size of your tank that you need and the number of people that are using your system. Then this is how often you need to have your tank pumped. So if you only have a 500-gallon tank and you've got 5 people on it, or 4 people on it, you need to have your tank pumped once a year. And if you read at the top here, it said, these figures assume there's no garbage disposal in use. And we'll get back to that in the questions, but basically if you have a garbage disposal, you need to increase the size of your system. Those solids don't get broken down in your septic tank, and they will clog up your tank much faster. So here they recommend, this says you'll have to increase the frequency. I think Ron probably has some suggestions for that as well. But you can see these tanks go up in size as large as 2,500 gallons. And if you have one person on a 2,500-gallon tank and that's normal use, you probably don't have to worry about pumping your tank that often. 31.9 years is what they recommend here. So it varies greatly based on the number of people and the size of the tank, which is why those are important things to know. So a to-do list for septic systems: one is to maintain the area around your tank or drain field. You need to be able to use your inspection port in the manhole so you can determine the depth of the sludge in your tank so you know when it needs to be pumped. You shouldn't have any trees. We get a lot of questions, and I'm sure Ron makes half his living on cleaning tree roots out of septic lines where people have trees close to their system. Same way with concrete or asphalt. All those lines are perforated pipe. They're not subject to a lot of tensile strength, and you can you drive over them with heavy equipment, depending on how shallow they are. You can crush them or cause compaction of the soil such that they're not effective. So the other thing you can do is reduce the flow into your system. The bacteria need to have time to do the work that they're doing, and so if you're throwing 1,000 gallons a day through your system, it doesn't give them time, and you're going to have a lot more solids build up and less bacteria growth. And so that's why this says no sump pumps, no whirlpools, or no softener backwash. Those things should be discharged to other ways, basically, to let your septic system do its job. Also, don't put anything else in your system that's not natural. You don't need any additives, biological or chemical, and I'll get to that more in the questions as well. A lot of people swear by those, but there's no proof that they actually do any good. And also no man-made stuff, obviously. Paint, pills. You put antibiotics down, a leftover antibiotic, dump them down the toilet because you're not sure what to do with them. You're killing bacteria, which is what their job is, and you're putting it in your septic tank. So you need to be careful with what you put in your system so that it can function normally. And inspecting your tank regularly and making sure you measure the solids so you know when it needs to be pumped so it can work effectively is probably the most critical thing you can do to maintain your system. There's a lot of information out there for folks who own septic systems. The EPA has this program called Septic Smart. They have a web page. There's an 11-page manual that walks you through a bunch of basics and proper care and all those things. They've got an entire program focused on this. And it's not just an issue for you as a well owner or a septic system owner, but it's also about source water protection. We have areas where there are septic systems where they are a conventional system on top of shallow bedrock or in karst areas where they really don't belong. And a lot of bacteria, high nitrate, E. coli, those sorts of things are making their way into shallow aquifers that then get pulled into a private well. So understanding your responsibilities, if you will, as far as your septic system, not only to protect your well, but your neighbors and the aquifer that maybe even your community may be using for community water supply. There's a lot of good information out there. NESE, I mentioned earlier, the National Environmental Services Center, has a lot of information about septic systems on their website. And you can just Google National Environmental Services Center and then search for septic, and you'll find this page. And they've got a lot of good information they provided for a long time to well owners all over the country. The NRWA came out with an app, which I downloaded on my phone, and I took some screenshots here. It's called Septic Insight. It's an app that helps you determine some things about your well. You can set up a pumping schedule. It tells you how to measure the size of your tank and even how to locate your tank, which I think Ron will give us some advice on that today. And so that you understand what you have and what issues you might want to be dealing with as far as your septic system. And there's a little inspection thing where you can go through your inspection and answer these questions. Do you have any of these issues? It gives you resources. And then and they list here EPA Septic Smart and Small Flow Clearinghouse, which is NESE, on their app. So you can even get to that stuff on your phone. So it's just a way to look at some of the common issues and what you might have. We were just at the National Environmental Health Association conference a few weeks ago, and we saw this presentation by a University of Minnesota professor. They've developed this H2O&M Community Septic Owner's Guide program. It's actually for anyone with a septic system or a decentralized system. So it says here, from a single family to a commercial property to a cluster serving 50 plus homes. What this guide does, and actually it's maybe better for your septic installer or your professional that you work with to use this to provide a guide for you. But you can go in and set up an account. It's free, and you can put in your information about your septic system. It'll provide you basically a handbook, like a guidebook, that for you as a homeowner, so you know all about your system, what type of system it is, operation and maintenance recommendations, all these different options. And it creates a boilerplate kind of PDF that you can download if you're a professional or even say an extension person who's trying to help some of the well owners in their county or jurisdiction. You can go in and create these, even put your own logo on them, as I understand. I haven't had a chance to get into this and use it, but it seems like the presentation that we saw at NESE or at the at NEHA. It's a pretty impressive program. So if you're interested, I encourage you to take a look at this. And anyone can go in, and it's all free. It's funded by USDA, and so yeah, it's a pretty neat program. So there's a lot of resources out there for people that have septic systems, because everyone's starting to catch up and realize how important it is to protect our source water, protect our streams and rivers. And we have a lot of systems that are, like I said, either go straight to a field tile, like in Illinois, we have some of those type of systems, or straight to a ditch or a creek or a river. And they do affect the water quality, ecology, and now I know there's studies looking at, it's not just nitrogen and E. coli that can be a problem, but we flush other things down our toilets, pills, personal care products, pharmaceuticals, all that stuff can affect the environment. And so all these tools are being made available to try to bring kind of the level of education up for everybody, as well as help you understand what you need to do for your individual system. As far as I mentioned, information is widely available. The best places to go are your county or public health department. And initially, it depends on what state you live in. Every new septic system gets inspected in some states, and they have folks who are devoted to that. They certainly know all the rules and issues. If you're in a particularly sensitive environment, like a karst area, which means it's fractured limestone that has caves and a lot of sinkholes and some of those things, it's much more likely for water to get into an aquifer and cross-contaminate other wells. Or if it's shallow bedrock and maybe a regular system shouldn't even be in place, but some of the old systems are. I know I was in New York last summer and ran across an area where the bedrock is between 5 feet or less from the land surface. And this one area, a lot of the homes are older, and they all had traditional septic systems with where basically the tile system was put right on top of the rock. And so because it's very fractured, that material is going straight down into the aquifer, and they were starting to see some of these homes all have higher nitrates and E. coli problems. And so they were looking at almost every one of these homes was going to have to install some kind of chlorine or treatment for bacteria in order to even use the water for drinking. Co-op Extension Service, your state wastewater agency, whoever that might be. In Illinois, it's IEPA. And then also your licensed septic installer and inspector. Those folks are who can give you the best information, especially locally. They know what your unique situation is as far as the geology of the area, and those things are what's acceptable and what are the local rules. And so those are the folks you should rely on. So that's what we have as far as a basic understanding of what you need to know about your septic system. You need to be able to access it. You need to have it inspected once in a while. You also need to make sure you pump it on a regular schedule. We had about 400 people sign up for this webinar, and we received well over 100 questions in advance from participants. So we're going to spend the rest of the time going through those questions, and we obviously can't answer all of them. And so what I'll say is some of these questions were specific to a state or rules in a state or about a very narrow topic that might not have broad application to most of the people on the webinar. If you'll email us your questions like that, we will look into it and get back to you, but we need to have a way to get back in touch with you. So also, I mentioned before, Katie is tracking any questions you might have. If you put them on the questions tab in your go to webinar box, we can look at those at the end. We'll try to answer as many of those as we can, time depending. So starting with the questions. One, I want to introduce Ron again. Ron, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, so Ron Helton's with D&D Sewer Service in Lincoln. We get this question. Matter of fact, I bet there were 20 questions out of the 150 or so we had that asked about additives. And we did this webinar last year, and the first time we gave it, I said, You don't need to use any additives. Your system's natural. It works great on its own. And I must have got 15 or 20 emails from well owners who all said, you're not right. Additives do work. We use it and it's done this for our system and all those sorts of things. So we've done a lot of work looking into this. We found a lot of resources, several research studies, and the bottom line is there's just no proof that additives do anything for your system. It's, in my opinion, you're putting money down the drain. Best case, it does nothing. Worst case, it may create some sort of increased solids in your system, depending if it's some kind of chemical additive. And we actually put this on our webpage, so if you go to the private well class and look under resources, you'll see a thing that says partner blog, and where we've answered questions. And one of the questions we have here is, do septic additives work? And there's a long answer that goes on below this if you want to read it, and we list several resources, including this from Small Flows, which is a magazine or brochure put out by the National Small Flows Clearinghouse, which is the National Environmental Services System, and they looked into it as well. They get a lot of questions on that topic, and the bottom line is there's no evidence that they actually do anything to benefit your system. And so that's my answer to this. And Ron, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I've been asked that question a lot too, and just what you said, I've pumped lots and lots of septic tanks, and I don't really see any evidence that their additives help. So what it looks like it does to me is take the scum layer on the top, and the bacteria seems to work a little faster, so the scum layer isn't as thick, but instead of being the scum layer on the top, then it just falls to the bottom as sludge. So, in my opinion, the best medicine for a septic tank is just to get it cleaned out. And then if the guy pumps it out, the septic's removed, the solids are removed. That's what actually causes the system to fail.
Great. Another thing was someone asked about softener backwash. Is it harmful to a system? Well, there's a lot of newer septic system or newer softeners that it's a lot of brine, very chlorinated. I found this online from Rhode Island, where basically they don't recommend it. It's not prohibited in Rhode Island, but putting that large amount of water through your system with all that chlorine is likely to affect your bacteria in your septic tank. And so what they recommend for Rhode Island folks is that you have a dry well, so you discharge it to a separate sort of place where it can infiltrate into the ground, and you still have to keep it so far away from a well, which makes sense because it's so chlorinated, and chlorine isn't necessarily a health hazard, but it does have a secondary standard. You start tasting those things. What's the rule in Illinois?
So in Illinois, they changed the code in 2014, and it cannot pass through your septic tank. And what they want you to do is to basically install its own lateral, so it discharges to its own lateral system.
Okay. So that's basically, it's basically the same thing like a dry well would be. So it gives it a chance to, All right.
There's actually certain softeners that are approved to go through septic systems, and they're a lot smaller flow softeners, and I don't really understand how that works, but there are a few softeners that are approved for direct discharge into a septic tank in Illinois, but for the most part, the convict, the one you buy off the shelf at Walmart or Menards or wherever would need to be run through its own lateral system.
All right, thanks. Yeah, and I just put up here, this is the document that I found that in, and it's from Rhode Island in 2012. And so these issues, there's been a lot of things happening in the last few years all over the country related to septic and aerobic systems and all those things, trying to look better at all the issues related to how septic systems might be contaminating the environment. So one of the other questions we got, if I get water from a deep aquifer, what is a safe distance from a septic system? So really the issue here is if you have an old hand dug or a shallow bored well, the water's coming into your well from near the surface. So what happens at the surface is a lot more critical than if you, say, have a sand and gravel well that has 250 feet of casing and then a screen from 250 to 255. That means the water's coming in that well down at 255 feet, and it's much less likely that anything from the surface is going to make it through 250 feet of various clay, silt, and sand to get into your well and cause a problem. But saying that, there's a lot of considerations that you need to think about with a well. One is that if it's a bedrock well, when a lot of cases when you drill a bedrock well, you put casing in until you hit bedrock, and then you stop the casing 10 to 20 feet into bedrock, so that the rest of that hole is open hole, so to speak. The rock acts like a casing itself. So you might drill a 400-foot well into bedrock. The bedrock's at 30 feet, you might only have 40 feet of casing. So now that does matter, because water can get in that well from 40 feet down to 400. So in effect, it only has to travel 40 feet down to get into a well. The other issue is the grouting on your well. So, for a long time, and most states require you to have liquid grout put around your well to seal the annulus so that, there's no pathway along the outside of the well from the surface down to wherever your water source is. The state of Nebraska discovered probably 10 or 15 years ago, they did a huge study where they looked at grouting and found that a lot of liquid grout doesn't necessarily stay in the annulus. It works its way out into the geologic formations. So they've found a lot of wells that if you could dig down and look at the annulus around the well, which is the area between the size of the borehole. So maybe for instance, you have a 7-inch borehole that you put a 5-inch well in. Now you've got this 2 inches of area that's open outside the well, and you fill that with clay or concrete and grout. So if that grout isn't really there, you do have a pathway along the outside of your well down to wherever your water's coming from and where your well's taking water in. So the best solution is just to keep your well and your septic far apart. That's not always the case. Matter of fact, I've just had a well this week where their septic tank is maybe 25 feet from their well. He assumes it's safe because, one, they've tested it and they don't have any issues, but it's also a 130-foot well and it's got a screen at the bottom. And in his case, he may be right, but it's not worth the risk. And, the bottom line is you should follow your state well construction code. I know there are 2 states, Pennsylvania and Alaska, that don't have well construction code, but they do list best practices. And, for instance, in Minnesota, the distance for a septic tank is 50 feet. I think Illinois has different rules, Pete, or Ron? Sorry. Oh, you are muted. I'm sorry. Ron, can you hear me?
So the distance from your septic tank to your well is actually 50 feet, but the actual lateral field or drain field is 75 feet. And that's exactly what you said, to try to keep the septic water out of the well water.
And that's just for Illinois. So
yeah, I'm sure other states, depending upon their soil types and whatever, it's different distances. So the best thing to do would be to check with your local health department. Find out just make sure that you're, in compliance and you're not contaminating your own water.
Yeah, so I guess the solution really is just to keep it as far apart as possible. Make sure it's down gradient if possible, so that if there is a water table that's moving water one way or the other, it's moving away from your well, not towards your well from your septic system. So we've got a number of questions here where I didn't list an answer. They've come in the last day or two, and that's why Ron's here. And so we're just going to go through these one by one and try to get it. There's a lot of good practical information here that you'll learn from going through these. I think there's about 20 questions that we put in here. And so the first one is, what's the best way to measure the sludge in my tank?
So the best way to measure sludge in your tank, they actually make a tool called Sludge Judge. And you can order them online, and you stick that in the tank, and it basically pulls a core sample out of your tank, and then you can look at it and see, how thick the solids on the bottom is, how much scum layer you have, and what's the distance between the scum layer and the solids and the clear water in the middle. But my recommendation is just to call a septic professional. That's what they deal with every day. It's, they're going to be the best judge.
And if you don't know where your septic septic system is, how do you find it?
Well, there's a few ways. You can, local hardware stores or whatever, usually you can buy what we call a ground probe. And what you do is either get in your crawl space or your basement and see where the pipe is leaving the house, and you use that ground probe and find the pipe, and then you can follow the pipe all the way to your tank. And from the tank, you can find the outlet side of the tank, and then start probing the pipe that leaves the outlet side of the tank to your lateral field. So you can locate all the pieces and parts of your septic system. Another way you may do it, and sometimes they are hard to find. Why contractors install them where and how they do sometimes baffles even me. So sometimes we have to get out a locator. So we run either an electric wheel or a sewer inspection camera down your drain, and then we have a locator that sends up an electronic signal, and we follow that signal to your septic system. So sometimes it can be tough to find a tank, but usually the ground probe in most cases works.
Okay, and how do you know if your lateral lines are working properly? Is there any good way to actually figure that out? That seems like a tough one.
Well, no, there's not a real good way. How you can kind of judge it is to dig up the outlet side of your tank and just make sure the baffle is there. The baffle is actually the most important part of the septic tank, the outlet baffle, that is, in my mind, because what that does is keeps the flow of the solids from floating out into your drain field and plugging it up. And how you can tell if it's working properly would be to take the septic lid off, and as the water is actually flowing out to the field, the water level in the tank should be right at the bottom of that pipe. A gallon in should be a gallon out. So, if the water level in your tank rises above that baffle, that means your laterals are sluggish or running slow. Other than that, there's not a real good way to tell if your laterals are working properly.
Okay, thank you. So, what questions would you ask a professional to be sure you're hiring a competent person to inspect your system?
Well, the first thing I would do would be to call my local health department and find out, hey, who are the contractors around, and what can you give me any information on the contractors? Have they been in trouble for regulations? Violating regulations? Do you work with them on a regular basis? What can you tell me about them? And then when you're talking to the septic professional, it's pretty much like any other business. Years of service and years of doing it teaches you a lot. So, how long have you been in business? If you just started last week, I don't know if I'd hire that guy. But, if he's been in business a while and seen some things, then hey, maybe that, you might want to take a look at it. So, and then ask other homeowners, other people with septic systems, who they used and, what kind of experiences they've had with them. So,
is it just do your due diligence? Just like you said, it's like any other business. You're not going to hire a contractor or anything else for even to do your roof unless you got, some idea that other people have been successful with them. So, impact of gray water diversion on my septic system, and just to make sure everybody's clear, gray water is water that's been reused. It's been treated, so it's fairly safe. But a lot of times, it's like municipalities may have a gray water diversion program where they're using it to water lawns. It's not for potable use, but it can be used for other things. Ron, you run into that, and how does that affect things?
Well, we don't run into it a lot in Illinois. So, pretty much in my local area, everything's well drained. So, in most cases, the reason you would be diverting the water away from your septic tank is if you're like in a drought-stricken place where you need the water to water your grass, or you're in heavy soils where the water really can't be absorbed into the ground. So we actually don't run into that a lot. We'll see once in a while people have a separate system, so it'll have the gray water will go to its own tank and may have its own lateral, but nobody's actually reusing it for any purposes in my local area.
Okay, I guess the impact it would have is actually a beneficial one for your septic tank. If our message is that you should try not to put too much water through your system, or minimize it where you can. If you're diverting water away, it should give your septic system more time for the bacteria to do their job and break down the things in the water and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so if the only thing that's going to the actual septic tank itself is like your toilets, then on the high end, toilets use 2.5 gallons of water, and that's all you'd be having to leach away into the ground. So it may be a good thing in some areas.
So what are some emerging issues for septic systems? And this is a really general question, but the way I looked at it is I know there's been a lot of changes in the rules. We're seeing a lot more aerobic systems, that sort of stuff. So, what have you encountered, and what are some things that have changed in the business the last few years?
They actually changed the code in Illinois in 2014. And it used to be with an aerobic system, you could go to the ATU is what we call it in the business, an aerobic treatment unit, and you could have your drain line run to the aerobic treatment unit and then come out of the back side of that unit right with a chlorination and a chlorination contact chamber, and then that water could be directly discharged into a ditch or a tile or the ground surface. And in 2014 they come up with some revisions, and now what they don't allow that. In very few cases they allow direct discharge, so you'd have to get an NPDES permit through the federal EPA, and I only know of 2 in the entire state of Illinois that's been approved in the last year. So it's very, very difficult to do the discharge to the ditch like's been done for the last 15 years or 20 years. So now you have to use the aerobic treatment unit, and then what they allow you to do is reduce your drain field size by 1/3. So when the water comes out of the back of the aerobic treatment unit, it's supposed to be much cleaner than out of a conventional septic system. So, I know there's a lot of when they made the changes to the code in Illinois, a lot of places put systems in, and the systems were installed. Now you have to do some sort of unconventional system, so mound system, like they use a lot of those up in Wisconsin and Minnesota, or maybe you have to do a sealed sand filter or something else to clean the water up. So.
Yeah, I noticed. I was in New York last summer, and you see a lot of systems along lakes where it's shallow bedrock. So basically, in those areas now, you're doing advanced wastewater treatment. instead of just basic. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Those systems are, and with all the regulation comes more expense. That's the downside to putting in an aerobic treatment unit, because then you have a cost of maintenance on the system, because they all have some sort of air pump. So if you don't know what an aerobic treatment unit is, basically it's a septic tank with an air pump on it, and what that air does is changes the bacteria from aerobic to aerobic, and then the aerobic bacteria actually works a lot faster than the anaerobic bacteria. So, what it does is add cost to the homeowner, because those systems are about 30% higher in cost to install. Maybe even higher than that in some cases. And then the other downside is there is maintenance. Somebody needs to come out and check your aerator and clean things and make sure everything's working properly a couple times a year, so the system performs at its peak performance. If you just throw it in the ground and nobody ever looks at it again, well, in 3 years, when the aerator's broke, all you have is a regular septic tank. So, yeah, so somebody, that is the downside to more code, more regulation. It does cost more.
Sure. Okay, so I have an old concrete septic tank. I'm on city sewer now, so should I fill it in or what?
My recommendation would be to fill it in. So what we have to do in my local area to fill them in is we take the top off and break the sides and the bottom up, fracture the concrete, and then pull the sides in on itself, and then we have to fill that with native soil or like soil from the area. So if it's clay soil, we put clay back in there. If it's blacktop soil, we put blacktop soil back in there.
And you break that up so that it can't hold any water, right?
Right. That's the whole thing, is you don't want it to be sitting there full of stagnant water, and at some point hydrogen sulfide gas actually breaks concrete down, and when biological material breaks down, it creates hydrogen sulfide gas. So that concrete is actually getting softer and softer over time. At some point it could just fall in, and then you fell into a septic tank. So,
sure.
You need to break it up and get it filled in with soil.
I know we recommend that you don't put anything over your septic field, and we still got questions about, can I plant a perennial garden on top of my drain field? Can I have livestock there? What about large trucks running over it, or putting a driveway? What's the disadvantage of all those things? Or, the perennial garden one, I guess I can't see it's a huge problem, but I guess there's always, I don't know what you think.
Well, the thing with perennial garden is now you're clearing the grass or vegetation that may take some of the rainwater and stuff away. I'm thinking about Illinois in the wintertime when those perennial plants are dead or dormant. Now that's just bare soil, and the water, has a direct path to your lateral field. I'd never recommend planting anything but grass on top of your septic system.
Well,
as far as livestock goes, the weight of livestock can actually crush the pipe or crush the parts, and heavy trucks are definitely no good.
Because, the perforated pipe isn't necessarily structurally strong, so anything too big gets on there, it could just crush the pipe, and then you've, messed up your drain field, basically.
Yeah.
So funding sources for repair and maintenance. You have any experience with this?
Yeah, I do actually. Here in Illinois, anyways, there is a. Hang on one second. I'll see if I can find the actual name of the program, because I think it's actually a federal program that offers like low interest, long term loans through the FDA. Hang on one second.
Sure, that's a USDA rural home group. It's I think it's mostly for like well repair or well drilling, but it must also include septic. So.
I know for sure well, I don't know if it's the same program that you're talking about, but we've had a couple of people that we've helped through the process with their local FDA guy, and you know, they were able to obtain a low interest, long term loan, be able to keep the payments down. I know there's some criteria and stuff you have to meet. It was actually pretty easy process.
Yeah, I know RCAP, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, they have 6 regional offices, and several of those help implement some of those loans as well, I think. And they might be another source, at least for the well side. I didn't know about the septic side. And I don't know if it's the same program or not, but they would know that as well. So, all right. I think you've already talked about this a little bit, maybe, but ATUs, you know, aerobic treatment units. You mentioned that they do cost more. The advantages are basically you have cleaner water coming out of your system. They do have higher maintenance. You know, what else do we need to know about them? And you can look at the second question there as well.
Yeah, the unit just needs to be maintained. You know, a lot of times people don't maintain these units, and then they just become they can become a nightmare for people. So main thing is have a qualified contractor come out and inspect that system. And like we offer maintenance contracts where we come out every 6 months and just make sure your aerator's working properly, any filters that need to be cleaned or changed, and you know, just make sure the system is doing its job to keep the water clean.
Sure.
And as far as affecting nitrate load, yeah, for sure. That's what an aerobic treatment unit is designed for, is to reduce the amount of nitrates coming out of the back of the system. So the soil has to treat less. If ever in an area was on an aerobic treatment unit, it would definitely reduce the amount of nitrates, you know, for nearby wells.
Okay, so I skipped. If I can go back here. Well, the last question was, I don't know where my inspection port's buried. Is that a concern? I think
No, most of them are buried. You just need to, like I said earlier, use a ground probe to find your tank. And usually there's 3 inspection ports on a septic tank, one over the inlet side of the tank. So if you was to follow the pipe from the house all the way to the tank, and then just go back onto the tank a little bit and dig it up right there, usually you'll find an inspection port for the inlet side. And then if you would go to the center of the tank and dig it up right there should be an inspection port in the center of the tank. And then the same thing for the outlet side, just going across the tank. And, you should be able to find the outlet port. The outlet port's actually probably the one you want to dig up and inspect everything from, because like I said earlier, the most important part of your septic tank is actually the outlet baffle that keeps all the floatable solids and any kind of material like that out of your drain field and from plugging the drain field up.
Okay. So how can you tell? I tell if my well is being impacted by my septic system. I can answer this. Really, if you sample your well annually, which is what we recommend in our class for nitrate and coliform, if you have issues with septic or maybe a livestock feedlot that's nearby, if it's impacting your well, you're going to see coliform and nitrate levels in your well that aren't natural or background. So really the best way to tell is if there's any kind of impact is by sampling and looking for those 2 things. That's pretty much what you would, the easiest things to find, so to speak, in well water if there's a connection. So, and as far as grouting to protect my well from any septic leachate, I'm earlier about grouting. Certainly grouting is a best practice for your well, and in many states it's required for any well construction today. But if it was liquid grout, you can't necessarily be assured. I guess I didn't mention the outcome of that study in Nebraska. And this wasn't a research study, really. It was more from the state agency there, was that the best material to use for grout is actually bentonite chips. So they're clay chips that are naturally formed. And when you put those around in your annulus and they get wet, they expand to a number of times their size, effectively sealing the annulus, and they don't go anywhere because they're already kind of a pebble-sized or larger chip. So, you know, grouting certainly is a good best practice, and it should protect your well. And it's just a matter of, it's still best to keep anything away from your well. You just never know. You know, if you have a PVC well and there are any trees nearby, a root can crack a PVC casing. So, you know, there's a lot of things that can cause a pathway into your well, and it's best just to keep any sources of contamination away from as far as possible. Okay, so Ron, for a home sale, what things would go on an approval or disapproval letter as far as what's being assessed if you did an inspection of a septic system?
So in our local area, the inspector, me as the inspector, I don't actually pass or fail the system. What I do is write a report on the system. So the local health department, based on my report, they determine whether the system passes or fails inspection. And what we actually go out and look for is how far is the septic tank away from the well? You know, is it within that 50-foot zone? Is it too close to the well and may contaminate the well water? Does the system have access within 12 inches of the ground? So in Illinois, the code says that septic system has to have, or a septic tank has to have access within 12 inches of the ground. So if the tank is 18 inches in the ground, there needs to be a riser of some sort added, so you know the system can be inspected or access gained. Are the baffles on the tank? So the inlet baffle is the baffle that's on the pipe that comes from the house into the tank, and what that inlet baffle does is gives the solids and time to decide whether they're heavier than water and sink to the bottom, or lighter than water and float to the top. That way, when the water goes out the outlet baffle, what's actually in the middle is fairly clear, clean water. And then we inspect to see that the outlet baffle is intact. Like I told you earlier, the outlet baffle is probably the most important part of the tank. And in old concrete tanks, some of them had concrete baffles, and when the biological material breaks down, it creates hydrogen sulfide gas. It actually collects for whatever reason on the outlet side of the tank, and it rots the top of the concrete baffle off, which allows the floatable solids to float out into the lateral field and then eventually plug up the field. And then what we do next after we get that all dug up and inspect all those things is we run water in the system. And I usually run about 200 gallons or so of water in the system, which is a pretty good water test for a home that's been occupied because they've been using it. You know, if you put an additional 200 gallons to what's been used, and then you pump the septic tank out to see if any of the water flows back from the laterals into the tank. And if that's happening, if the water flows back from the laterals into the tank, what that tells me is those laterals are completely saturated or completely full of water, and now the water is actually backing up into the tank, which could either eventually surface in the yard or back up into the house. So that tells me the laterals aren't working properly. And then what I do is take a ground probe and find the laterals and kind of determine how many feet. And based on, my knowledge of local soils, then I can, sort of determine, hey, is that system sized right for the number of bedrooms in the house? How they actually size the system in Illinois is based on the number of bedrooms. So for every soil type has a rating, and based on your number of bedrooms times the whatever the rating is, there's a formula that tells you need this amount of laterals. So after I've looked at all of them, then I kind of make my recommendations. Is the system in good working order? Is it in poor working order? Has it showed signs of being over full? And the signs of being over full are solid materials on the baffles of the tank. When you take the lid of the septic tank off and flip it over, is it all stained on the bottom, or does it look like normal concrete? Those are just some examples of things that I look for when we do septic inspections.
Sounds pretty thorough. So, okay, moving on. So the telltale signs of a septic problem are a line break. I guess it'd be the thing
so
we
it's
mentioned
backing
earlier.
up, the water surfacing, the water backing up into your house, or the water coming to the surface of the ground.
Yeah.
That's how you tell us something's important.
And I think we already answered the second question. Is a maintenance contract worth the money?
In my mind, it's very worth the money, and I know your chart showed for this many people to pump it out this often and this and that, but how I explain it to people is we charge in my local area, we charge $230 to pump a septic tank, and I recommend almost everyone pump out every 2 years. And what that does is every 2 years you get a professional that comes out to your house, digs up the tank, makes sure the baffle's intact and everything looks like it's in working order, and you don't have any problems. And then you know that you remove the solids, and then you give your laterals a break. As that septic tank has to fill back up with water, those laterals are actually drying out and resting a little bit. So, in my mind, how I explain it to people is $230. That means over the next 20 years, we'd pump your tank 10 times if we pumped it every 2 years, you would pay $2,300 over 20-year span. If you don't pump your septic tank over the same 20-year span, and we have to come out and replace your laterals or replace the whole system, at today's cost, it's $6,000 to $15,000. What's it going to be in 20 years? So in my mind, the $2,300 over 20 years is money well spent.
Very well said. All right, so 3 more questions. Should you space out laundry use to overload the system? And I think this question was a little longer. Basically, there's a pretty large family. They take a lot of showers. Is there a good reason not to do their laundry all at one time on a Saturday, let's say, versus how is that going to overload the system and, that sort of thing?
Yeah, for sure. It's, the amount of water you can put in a septic system is not finite. It's all based on, the loading rate for a particular type of soil. So if you was to space out your laundry and space out your showers, that would actually give the ground time to absorb some of the water. And what happens when you do overload your system? So now you use so much water that the tank's all the way full and it's over the outlet baffle. And as that water recedes, some of those floatable solids go ahead and float out the outlet baffle and on out into a septic field. And that's a continuous cycle. And pretty soon there's enough floatable solids out into your lateral field that actually cause your laterals to plug up or stop working. So, yeah, if you could space out your laundry and your showers, you're definitely better off.
So as far as septic systems in karst environments, I think I mentioned this before, but if it's karst, which is a type of it's like caves and sinkholes, and it's water broken down rock that's very fractured, has a lot of conduits through it, if you will. They're just not safe. Even there's a lot of water quality issues just from livestock or other things in these areas. I know as one county, Illinois, that's very karst, it's all karst environment, they put in a regional water district because about 80% of the private well samples all come back with coliform or E. coli hits, just because there's a direct conduit straight down to the aquifer. And so if there are septic systems in karst environments, there won't be any new ones. I think it's an area, that sort of vulnerable area, most states will eventually have rules in place that say you have to have advanced treatment, probably aerobic treatment and advanced, so that the water that discharges is clean and safe in the environment. So there's certainly a bad idea, especially a conventional system, or anything that can discharge that's not fully treated. So Pete, for the last, or Ron, I'm sorry, for the last question, these folks going to use an old cabin that hasn't been used in 7 years. Is the septic system still viable? Is there a way to check that and bring it up online? What are the pitfalls there?
Yeah, usually it would still be in working order. Basically, it's got a 7-year rest, so any laterals that may be there should have healed themselves from any of the biological material that made its way out into the soil. And the first thing I would do is to dig up the septic tank and check the solid content of the tank and have the tank pumped out. And then after that, basically start using it. That's how you bring it online.
All right. I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about our program, and then we'll get to the questions that folks might have asked. Katie, I'm going to unmute you. Oh, we're tagging here. Do we have questions?
Yeah, we have several. I think about 15 or so.
Oh my. Okay. Well, let me.
Some of them have been repeats, though, so not all of them need to be addressed.
All right. Well, quickly, I'm assuming most of you that are on the call today know what the private well class is, but in case some folks were given this information about this webinar and haven't taken the class, it's 10 lessons. It's self-paced. This is all funded through the US EPA. It's all free. And these webinars, like today's webinar, are recorded. They're on our website. We also have multimedia lessons. We have short videos, podcasts, and again, these webinars. If you have issues, you can email us or call us. We'll try to get you to the right person in your area, or if it's something we can answer, we will. We work with partners all over the country and try to help folks find local resources. And really, this whole program is an outreach and education program funded by US EPA and RCAP to help well owners understand their responsibilities and how to be good stewards of their wells and that sort of thing. So, the lessons cover everything from, here's a picture on the left of, this is from Iowa, the groundwater basics, the geology of Iowa and what a well might look like, ways to look at your drinking water analysis, how contamination occurs, different kinds of treatment, why is your pump cycle on and off. And we used a lot of resources from around the country from folks who are pretty smart about each of these issues. So, types of well construction, why you should locate your well in certain areas, that sort of stuff. This is our front page, and to take the class, the 10-lesson class, it's emailed to you, 10 lessons, 1 a week for 10 weeks. Click on the little envelope on the left, and it'll take you to this page where you can sign up. Just your email address and a first name and where you live, which state you're in, and that's really just so that we can show EPA that this program is actually being used nationwide. And we have all of our webinars, like today's, is being recorded. We put those online. They're on our website here. Like this is one we did for environmental health professionals or sanitarians in February. This one will be here too after today, probably early next week. And so you can watch those whenever you want. We also have these short videos that are a couple minutes long about a specific question, like this one, how does my private well work? And it just walks you through the process of, what your pump does and your pressure tank and why you have a pressure switch and just basic issues about your well. And there's about 20 of those videos available, and we're doing more. If you're a professional, your extension or a sanitarian or, involved with working with well owners, we have a partner program basically that we have a newsletter that goes out once a month, and it's really not for well owners but for all the people who work with them. So we provide resources, best practices, information about other programs around the country that are doing really cool things. And there's a place on our website under the resource library to sign up. And this is just one of our newsletters. If you're a sanitarian, for instance, we've put a version of our class on NEHA's website. They have put it up there with, you can get up to 10 credits if you need to maintain your license, that sort of thing. So give me 2 minutes to pull this up. We're just going to keep going because it's already 10 after 2. Ron's still here, and I'm going to get out of this PowerPoint and get into the questions that Katie's been loading up for us. So hang on just a second here. Okay. There we go. Does that look good, you guys?
Looks good to me.
Okay, I'm gonna unmute Ron here, maybe. Can you hear me, Ron? I can't seem to unmute him. Oh, yeah, there you go.
Now I'm here.
Okay, so I think you've already answered this question. So if you don't have, if it's, an underground house without a crawl space, oh boy. I guess the first trick is finding where the line goes out, right?
Yeah, so at that point, really, you're down to hiring a professional to come and run some kind of locator out the pipe, and then they can find it that way.
Yeah, it's a matter of finding where to start. So I think we've answered number 2. We don't believe they are necessary. There's no information that shows they are. That one article from Nessie says there are over 1,200 products out there that are supposed to, quote, help your septic system. All the professionals and scientists all say that none of them are really necessary if you maintain your system properly. So the range of time that tanks should be pumped, I provided that list from Nessie. Ron gave an example of how they do their maintenance for their customers. You talk to your professional, but it still depends on the size of the tank and the number of people before your tank fails for sure. If you have a small tank and a lot of folks on your system, your tank's going to fail a lot sooner than if it's just 1 or 2 people and the tank's pretty large. So, waiting to that last minute isn't necessarily a good idea. So, number 4, Ron, are plants and shrubs okay in addition to grass?
I only recommend grass, no other plants. The roots can get into the pipe, like you said, and plug up the system. So.
Number 5, if the well was installed a while ago and there are no records, we run across a lot of folks that don't have well records, so they don't know how deep their well is. There's a couple things you can do. One is if you ever have your pump worked on, or if it's not a suction pump that's in your basement, but it's actually a submersible pump that's in the well, then whenever you pull the pump, you'll get an idea. You can get an idea then. If you don't even know the depth of your well, if you can measure the depth. So what we do, I work at the State Water Survey. We measure water levels and well depths all the time for folks in Illinois, as far as when we do a research project in a particular area, we'll measure the depth of the well, and from that we know enough about the geology to know, well, that well's a bedrock well or that well is a sand and gravel well. So if it's sand and gravel, for instance, in this area, we're glaciated in Illinois, over 2/3 of the state, so we can get an idea of if it's finished, say it's 100, like the well I mentioned earlier, he knows his well's 130 feet deep, and it's in a Glassford sand and gravel aquifer. So he figured that out by looking at the State Geological Survey has maps of the geology of the state, and so those folks are very helpful. If there are no records at all and the state doesn't have any records, if you could figure out how deep your well is, then you could probably figure out where your water's coming from. That's what I would do. Pulling your pump isn't a cheap thing. We've got tape stuck in wells and had to pull the pump, and it's probably just to pull the pump for having a contractor come out, it's about $500, at least it was for me. And so it's not a cheap proposition necessarily, but it is a way to find out that information. So and you can also look if, the same driller, even though they're not around anymore, and there's 6 wells in your area, and they've all were drilled about the same time, or, that sort of thing, then your state may have some well records for one of those wells. Maybe they've used it for a study, or someone's had a problem with their water quality and there's a record. And actually, that's how this person I mentioned figured out their well was 130 feet deep. There are no records of the well being drilled, but the owner in the 70s had the State Water Survey run a chemical analysis on the well, and he was the original guy who drilled the well back in the 50s, and he told us that it was 130 feet deep, and so that's how we figured that out. So, do a little investigation, talk to your state agency that regulates drillers or well construction. If they don't house well records, maybe there's another agency that does. They can steer you in the right direction. And if you want to email me and tell me what state you're in, we can probably try to help you work on that. No guarantees. Even in Illinois, where the law passed in the 60s that said you had to file a log with the state, we probably don't have half the well logs. Other states like New York, they didn't pass that law until 2000. So my guess would be that in New York, they only have about 10% of all the well logs for the wells that are really there. So that's unfortunate. Does seasonal use affect the ecology and function of the system? How about a cold climate? So basically, if it's only used intermittently in a cold climate, and you're only using it during the summer, let's say, how does that affect things, Ron, or does it?
I don't know. If you're only using it in the summertime, no, it shouldn't affect anything. You're still only discharging water into the ground when it's not frozen. But I know just from digging in the ground and whatnot in very cold climates. If you're in Alaska or up in Minnesota, where sometimes the frost is 5 feet deep in the ground, and your septic system's only 3 feet deep in the ground, that there is potential for the water and the laterals to freeze up, and then the system wouldn't work correctly. So.
Well, and going back to that example about 7 years of no use, would all the bacteria in the septic tank be gone?
Yeah, so it would probably have eaten up all the available food. Basically, the bacteria would have eaten up all available food that was left over and have died. But it would be no different than starting up a brand new septic system. So when you start using the bathroom, your body produces that bacteria. Every time you use the bathroom, you put the bacteria into the tank. So.
Right. So it starts it all over again.
Now, what could happen is the sludge layer in the bottom of the tank, because everything in the tank has died and fallen to the bottom of sludge. The sludge layer on the bottom of the tank could be heavier, so you may pump it at the start of every season or whatever.
Okay, now as far as I missed the table that I put up, that was just one example. So for two people, a 1,000-gallon tank is probably not as often. I know necessarily every 2 years you'd need to, but that's
Probably every 5. I don't know. I
What's
don't know
that?
what the charge is. Usually for whenever I see a 1,000-gallon tank and there's only 2 people, generally it's 2 elderly people living there. They could probably go 4 or 5 years between pumpings. But you know, the other thing, not just pumping the tank. When the guy pumping the tank's there, he should also be inspecting the baffles and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, is it worth the $230 to wait a longer period of time in between septic pumpings? In my mind, it's not.
sure. Is 1 cup of bleach per week too much for 3 toilets? So I'm assuming that they're putting straight bleach in each toilet every week. Probably.
I don't know. I just recommend that you don't use any bleach or anything that can kill the bacteria in your system. You know, that's how the ground actually breaks down the material that makes its way out into the soil, and that's how the septic tank actually works based on bacteria. So the more bleach or the more anything that you put in there, the more likelihood of having problems.
All right. Well, we've already answered number 8. Yeah, many home buyers avoid properties that include a well and septic because they have no experience. What would you say the advantages of owning a home with a septic and well system? Boy, you know, if your well and your septic are maintained properly and constructed properly, then you have, you know, it's more freedom. You can live wherever you want, versus being on a city system. If you don't develop experience and become kind of a good steward of your well and understand how it works and why you might have certain problems, then you really have no business having a well or septic system. And you know, there are a lot of people who move to the country because it's this nice 3-acre lot and they've got woods and they've lived in the city their whole life. They don't understand what it means to maintain a well, but it's really no different than paying a water bill every month if you live in town, or in your septic bill every month. Every 2 months is what I have to pay if I live in town, versus when I grew up, I lived in the country and we had our own well and septic. If you're not putting resources towards maintaining your system or being prepared for when there is a problem, that's why you're paying your water bill and your septic bill every month. It's not because you're not paying for the use of your water, you're paying for the people who check it to make sure it's safe, you're paying for the people who maintain the infrastructure so the water can come out your tap. All those things that now you're responsible for doing yourself. And so, you know, you shouldn't buy a home with a well and a septic if you're not willing to learn how to take care of those things. It's not difficult. It just takes some time and some diligence. And so, you know, on the other side of that, for instance, if you're not sampling your well annually or regularly to determine that it's still safe and the water's safe, I recommend you should be on a city system where somebody's doing it for you. You know, I just learned yesterday, I didn't know this until I was visiting a well yesterday, that many wells installed through the 70s and 80s, if it's a sand and gravel well, there's a seal, a packer that goes on the top of the screen where it connects to the well casing. And at least this well in 1974, and many like it, that packer's made out of lead. So you need to understand your system, how old your well is. You need to test it to make sure that, you know, for instance, lead isn't necessarily a risk at all if your water's not corrosive. But if it is corrosive, then you could have a problem. So you need to be willing to spend the money to sample your well and spend the money to make sure your system is maintained properly, your septic system. And, you know, that's what I would say. That's no different than knowing how to take care of your car or making a repair on your home. You know, if you don't want to do that yourself, then you need to be willing to pay somebody else to do it. And if you don't want to do either, then you shouldn't have it. So that's my answer.
So in general, if the systems are working properly, they would be cheaper to maintain than paying a sewer bill or a water bill. I know in our local area here, the sewer bill is about $70 or so every 2 months, which is $700 or $800 a year, and then the water is anywhere from $20 to $30 a month, depending upon your use. So, there's another $300 or $400 a year. So you're $1,000 a year, and in my local area, to pump a septic tank is only $230, and at the most, I recommend pumping them about every 2 years. So, there are some benefits. It can be much cheaper than living in town with sewer and water.
Sure, and there's a lot of issues to consider. If you're in a very rural area, for instance, I know I grew up in a very rural area, and we had an ice storm back in the 70s. We were without power for 7 days. So we had a generator that actually, it took 2 people to carry, but it went next to our light pole, and we had a plug-in, a 230 there, where you could plug it in and have it run. And that's how we kept heat in our house and our freezer from thawing out and our well running. But if you don't have a generator, you're not prepared to live in a rural area, you won't have a well that works because, they work on electricity. So, you have to understand you're gaining some independence and you're responsible for yourself. And there's some people who that means more to them than anything in the world. But it's also could be less convenient. And like I said, if you maintain it properly and do what you're supposed to do, just like getting your oil changed every 3,000 miles or 5,000 miles, it should work for a long time and you should have no problems with it. So it's really, but you're not beholden to anyone. And, there's a lot of folks who that matters a lot to. So it's really, there's 2 ways to look at that for sure. And a lot of people do. So the next question, number 10, do you come out and do workshops on septics for groups? I don't. At the State Water Survey, I don't know if, I'm not going to speak for Ron. I don't know that they do workshops, but just like today, Ron's donating his time to come help on this workshop, so to speak. And I'm sure, depending on where you're at, either your extension or your county health department or that inspects your septic, some of those folks may rely on some local contractors and septic installers for some of those things. What I tell people when you start talking about doing a workshop to get well owners involved and educated, the more partners, the better. So you should try to hook up with your health department and your extension office and, some local businesses and try to get everybody involved, spread the wealth and share the responsibility and that sort of thing. So, and I'd be glad if you're in Illinois to steer you in the right direction. I'm not a septic expert personally, so I can teach the basics and that's about it. So, number 11, I was told to chlorinate my well, so water from my well eventually goes into my septic. Is chlorine bad or okay in general? Well, when you chlorinate your well, and I'm assuming that's because you had a bacteria problem, then if you follow and do that properly, you have chlorinated all your pipes, all your outlets, all your spigots, everything. It's kind of a quick shock to the system, so to speak. Is chlorine bad or okay in general for your septic system? I mean, chlorine kills bacteria, but it can handle a certain load, if you will. And Ron, you have anything else to add there? I mean, chlorine's good. It kills, you want it in your system so that your drinking water doesn't have bad bacteria like E. coli, but too much chlorine in your septic could cause a problem for the bacteria in your septic system. So,
yeah, so my recommendation would be to find out why and how the bacteria is getting in your well, and stop it at that point so you didn't have to chlorinate your well. Because too much chlorine in a septic system is detrimental for sure to a septic system. It's kind of a catch-22. Probably the amount that you're putting in your well to kill the bacteria in the well. If it's diluted through enough water that it's not going to kill your septic system. But you know, I don't know. You know, I guess you just have to figure out how many parts per million and what what amount your septic system could withstand, and all that's based on how much bacteria is actually being put in the system every day.
Well, and even if it did cause a problem for your septic short term, it's not a continual release of chlorine that's going to continually kill your system, so it'll recover.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, it's more important to chlorinate your well and be sure that the water you're drinking isn't going to make you sick, for sure. So, who can test your well for glyphosate? Like, I'm not even sure what that is. I'll have to get back to you. Send us an email. Ron, do you know what that is? Is that a...
No, I don't.
Yeah, I don't. I'm not sure. It's
glyphosate is. I think that's a chemical that is sprayed on crops. Yeah, I'm not for sure who can test for that.
Well, the only other thing this could be is if it's meant to be. Is it glyphosate that's part of this?
Steve, it looks like it's a broad spectrum systemic herbicide and crop desiccant.
Okay. Well, it would. You'd have to find a lab in your area that's probably EPA certified, or look at a list on like your state primacy agency's website of labs that might test for those things. I do know from some of the work we've done that testing for herbicides and insecticides and fungicides isn't something that every lab does, and yeah, I don't even know what it is, so I don't know that it's that common. But we can, if you'll email us, we can look into it, and especially if we know where you're at, we can determine what labs in your area might be available to do that kind of testing. So that's my best answer for that one. Oh my. So I'm going to read this out loud, just so it makes more sense to me. A developer is planning on diverting 21 acres of stormwater runoff. So I assume that means like concreted runoff from its housing area to a 2-cell wet pond, an infiltration pond located on 1.6 acres behind my house. 9 homes, including mine, have septic systems, which are located down gradient from these ponds. I believe that 21 acres of stormwater infiltrating into the ground adjacent to homes with septics can cause damage to the septic systems. The amount of groundwater flowing down gradient across homeowner septic drainage fields. Okay, so 9 homes are within 15 feet to 500 feet of the wet pond and infiltration pond. Is it correct to state that the 2 new ponds will damage existing neighbors' systems? The infiltration pond is designed for over 34,000 cubic feet of water. You know, boy, I don't know that I can answer this question. It really depends on the water table, the type of soil. You know, if you're
soil,
yeah, it's a very sandy area. More of the water is going to go down than across. Do we know what the water table is? Yeah, I need to know what the water table level is now. I mean, it's not like the water is going to be running over the septic systems and, you know, taking away soil and sand and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, this is an engineering question. There's just too many variables here.
Exactly what I was going to say. There's too many variables. What I would recommend is to hire an engineering firm to give you some recommendations.
Yeah, I know that's not that helpful, but
yeah, in the right conditions, it sure could impact your septic system.
the homes are within 15 feet of the wet pond, but is the septic system within 15 feet of the wet pond. I mean, that's pretty close. I'd be surprised if they'd be able to put it within 15 feet based
Right,
on.
they're right. I know in the Illinois code you would be allowed to put it within 15 feet of the septic system.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not sure. This is a complicated issue, so and could be a legal one. So, Okay. We have sulfur water. We put hydrogen peroxide in our water system. Is this killing the bacteria in our septic system? I don't believe so. Hydrogen peroxide is an oxidant. I mean, it has no chlorine. It's hydrogen and oxygen. So I think the hydrogen peroxide is there to, I'm sure it's to oxidize the sulfur and drop it out of your system so that it's not staying in solution. So I don't think it will affect your bacteria, but I would want to ask one of our lab guys to be sure, because I'm not a chemist. So if you want to email me, I know I've said that a lot today, but I can find someone who can give you a more qualified answer. That's my job, so I'd be glad to. So the last question, is a cesspool different than a septic system? Ron?
Yeah, it sure is. So I'm not for sure exactly what they're talking about here, but in some states where the soil's not very absorbent, what you dig is like a big lagoon or a cesspool, and then the septic water goes into there, and then it actually evaporates into the air, and the ultraviolet light kills the bacteria, and in some cases that water can run off to different areas or whatever. So I'm not really for sure what they're talking about cesspool, if they're talking about that or not.
Well, I know we don't have very many of them in Illinois, but I learned from the Tazewell County Health Department that it is legal in Illinois to have a lagoon for your septic discharge. And I know there's one in Tazewell County, but they're not common. But
I think we have Logan County here too. That you just don't see them around here. Now, like down in Missouri and stuff, where they're in real heavy clay soil, you see them quite a bit there. So.
Yeah, so basically, a cesspool is it evaporates versus a septic system that infiltrates.
Right, and some of the water does soak away into the ground or whatever, but most of it evaporates. And sometimes, they'll have what they'll do is create a sand filter behind them. Some of the water will be able to go out of the pipe through the sand filter and then get discharged somewhere.
All right. Well, I think that's all the questions. So, and that's the last slide. So for the 128 of you that have stuck around for the whole webinar, thank you. And this will be put on our website. And if you have any additional questions, be sure to email us, and we can try to deal with those individually. And especially if we didn't answer your question today, let me know. And if we'll do everything in our power to do so and get an answer back to you. So, Katie and Ron, thank you both for participating and helping. And with that, thanks for attending.